Thank you for inviting me here. It's very exciting to be part of this event. I want to show you some samples of my work because the way I work is sometimes for people confusing because it's not always clear which part is research and which part is physical art objects and so on. And for me, this is not so important. For me, my whole process, my whole research and finished work is sometimes kind of a gray zone, which is, if you ask me, it's all part of the same project, so it's all art or maybe it's not art at all, but I don't care. What I care about is the role as artist, as some kind of researcher, some kind of explorer, but also a person which has a green card, who can go into all kinds of different contexts. And this is also what I have developed more and more. Instead of just being in a studio situation and producing art, I think for me the most exciting thing about making art is also to push the limits and the borders of what an artist can do and what is art, of course. But for me, working in public space is a field where it's more difficult to create art because it's not so obvious. If you put something in a gallery, it immediately becomes art. If you take it out of the gallery, there is no free ride. You have to work on it, you have to create some kind of intelligence, and that intelligence has to interact with society and politics and people and so on. I am born and raised in Norway. I'm educated in Norway, but 19 years ago I came to Berlin on a residency program. I was supposed to be there for a year, but I never made it back because I really loved being in Germany, where art is much more based on a discourse, it's based on critique, and the artist is much more relevant in Germany because artists have been part of a new nation building after the fall of the wall and also after the Second World War. It's been really important for Germany to show that they are democratic, that they are free, and that they allow the free spirit, the free expression. Germany has really become the new kind of homeland for me intellectually. What you see here is actually a little appetizer from a project I did in Bergen, from the Festspiele in Bergen. But the background is from Berlin. What you see here is the town hall of Bergen, because I wanted to project some of those values I care so much about in Germany. We can start the PDF. This is a text on the building next to where the Berliner Wall used to go. It says, die Grenze verläuft nicht zwischen den Völkern, sondern zwischen oben und unten. Which means, now, when the wall is gone, the border is not anymore between people or nations, but it is still a border between high and low. This is, of course, a classical socialist or Marxist ideology, and it was painted by some young people who just lived close to the border and ran over the border as it disappeared, squatted the first house, and painted this. This is a classical, radical, and idealist statement. But I also can't help loving that, even graffitis in Berlin are political. It's not just writing your name or some kind of hip-hop quote from New York City or something. It's really political. But it didn't catch my interest first. I saw it for years. But then, after 15 years, another graffiti turned up on the other side of the street, on the former west side. So you can imagine there was this border, the Berliner Wall, it's gone. And you have the graffiti there, and 15 years later, you have graffiti answering the first one. And it says, nein, die Grenze verläuft nicht zwischen oben und unten, sondern zwischen dir und mir. The border doesn't run between up and down anymore. It's between you and me. So it's actually analyzing another graffiti, which is political, dismantling it and bringing it back to kind of a contemporary discourse around where the borders are. And I think the beauty of this is that you have two contextual graffitis discussing each other, if it's horizontal or if it's vertical, or is it just imaginary, is it just mental? And I think this says it all. And again, I was kind of grabbing this graffiti and I was bringing them to Bergen, because Bergen is also actually a German city from the Hansa time. And I projected the first one on the mayor's office. And the other one, I think that fell out. The other one I projected on the concert hall, which is just across. So I kind of recreated that debate in public space in German. This is a project, Fremdgehen, which means, in German, it means to go to the foreign. And when I came to Germany, I thought it was a beautiful word, because my German was quite bad. And I thought, like, Fremdgehen, to go to the unknown, sounds like being an explorer. I was like, yeah, that's like what I'm doing. And my German friend said, no, this is a bad word. Fremdgehen means to sleep around. It's the German word for being unfaithful sexually. But I kind of still liked it, because in every language, being unfaithful is always a negation of faithful. But in German, Fremdgehen is actually a kind of active thing. It's not about who you cheat on, it's about what you do. And it's some kind of action in it. And I think semantically I like it. I like the word, but I didn't know where to put it. So I kept it in my bag. Like when you learn a new language, you kind of have these favorite words you collect, and so did I. And a couple of years later, the National Museum of Germany invited me to do a show about Nordic art, because there were so many Scandinavian artists in the international art world. They wanted to make a focus, just like today here with the Focus Norway. They wanted to do a focus on Scandinavia, and I was invited to do. I was supposed to be, the nature guy from Norway, and I thought, I would love to do a project about some Norwegian women who came to Germany in 1946, and they didn't get a grant. They didn't get a show in the National Museum. So I decided to donate that word, Fremdgehen, and do a project for the women who had sexual or romantic relationships to German soldiers in Norway during the war. I'm not saying that was popular, I'm not saying it was necessarily good, but the bad thing was that Norway decided after the Second World War to throw these women out. They even used the word deportation, and they illegally put them in camps, and they sent them with the same trains as the Nazis used to deport Jews to Auschwitz. And the Norwegian state sponsored that deportation to Germany. And they lost their passports. They had no money. Some people had a baby on their arm. And here they were in a totally demolished Berlin in 1946. And Norway using the same kind of Nazi methods as they were criticizing the Germans for. So I wanted to do a portrait of these women who are totally invisible, at least in a Norwegian scale, and also in Germany. Most Germans didn't know about this. They're so concerned about their own guilt and their own history of deportation. So I spent a lot of time finding these women. It was very hard. And finally, I found a few women who told their story. And they were kind of sweet old ladies. And we had coffee, and they told me that they got, shaved on the head with a swastika and everything. Terrible stories. So as a first step, I decided to stamp my own passport, because it says in your passport you're not allowed to do that. So I thought, I get grants and I get articles and focus for going to Germany, and these women just had a shitty time, and most of them also ended in the eastern part of Germany, and their former soldier men ran away, and they were sitting there alone in a new regime. So I stamped my own passport, and on Hamburg Bahnhof I made a huge neon sign saying Fremdgehen, and then I asked the German flag factory to cut up the German flag and sew it together as a Norwegian flag, as a hybrid, as an unfaithful flag, because that's me even. I go to Germany. That's maybe also my flag. So it's a red, yellow, black flag, but everybody thinks it's the Norwegian flag. So this was on the top of the museum, and inside the museum there were videos of these ladies telling their story. And I also had friends and colleagues who said, I also want that stamp in my passport. So I started to, give people stamps saying unfaithful. And I even printed them out as big pictures. And this is also from the Norwegian embassy in Berlin. And the cool thing about this was also that people were writing me that they have been traveling to Guatemala or to US and all over, and they were stopped by the border control, who said, like, what's this print in your passport? That's not allowed. And these people who had the print in the passport, they had to tell that story. So they were basically standing on the border, on the border control, telling the story about these women who lost their passports, which became a kind of performative piece. And then I also collected 800 documents from the Norwegian Parliament, which had been secret for 60 years, concerning these women, with word by word, using deportation and punishment and retaliation and so on. And I made installations of that. I did several versions of that. It traveled on tours, because I really wanted to make the bad reputation for Norway, because Norway always think they are the good guys, and Germany was always the bad guys. I hate that. Germany is the biggest democracy in the world. They did huge mistakes, but they learned from it, and they learned to doubt, which Norwegians haven't yet learned. They are still so full of themselves, they're so rich, they're so proud, which is good, but you have to learn from your mistakes, and you have to be deeper and wider and see more, and that's what I love about Germany. So when I came to Berlin, there was this huge debate about this building here. It's a former parliament of DDR, the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the communist parliament in East Berlin. And when I came there, it was extreme debates where people discussed, should we demolish it? Is this shit? Is this communist time? And other people said, yeah, but you know, it was also a people's house. This is also where I'm married. And we had bowling there. We had, you know, striptease there. We had bars there. So it was much more. It was really a kind of iconic architecture in the heart of Berlin. So after the wall came down, there was this polarized debate. Some people wanted to demolish it, some people didn't want to demolish it. And the debate was going on every day, in every newspaper, in every radio station, every TV station, every day. So I thought like, oh, they're really interested in architecture. But it wasn't about the architecture. It was really about, what does it mean? Are we now all West Germans? Or are the East Germans and West Germans just Germans? Or this was an identity debate, and the house was right in the middle of that debate. And I tried to tap into it and try to understand it. And during that time, there was a kind of slow demolition of it because there was some asbestos in it. They had to take away all things inside. Here you see how it used to be. And suddenly, suddenly it looked like this inside. It was totally stripped and it was a ruin, but still the ruin was alive. Actually, it was longer a ruin after the communist time than it was a building for the communists. It was finished in 1976, and in 1999 it was abandoned. And it was empty until 2008, sorry. 2008. So I thought, you know, this is just so interesting. And I started to do research on how can I transform this building into a piece of art, containing that huge doubt which Germans have about their own history. But at the same time, this doubt is also what helped and in a way saved Germany. So we still gain trust to the Germans as Democrats. So I worked for 6.5 years with lobby, with politicians, with bureaucracy to get the permission to do a takeover of the whole building. This was discussed by the Bundestag, the parliament, 2 days in a row. What the hell is this Norwegian doing with that former communist parliament? And it was a full parliament of representatives discussing this. I think this in itself was a piece of art. But my suggestion was to turn the whole palace into a palace of art, containing the very important German post-war, post-wall doubt. So I created a sign 46 meter long and 9 meter high. And finally I got the permission from the parliament. And I finally managed to finance it. And we drove 18 trucks from the south of Germany up to Berlin. Here I'm on the top of the F installing it. So you can see it's quite a challenging format here. And in the end, the whole building became a sculpture, a social sculpture, an empty parliament with 900 meters of handmade neon lightening up the whole place for 6 months. And the coolest thing about this wasn't just the piece in itself, but this boosted a lot of new discussions about German politics, about German culture, how do we deal with doubt and so on. So I think it's very exciting to enter or intervene in a political context and then put it back in the same context, and to see what happens. And this means I cannot control the situation all the time. I'm captain on this ship, but I'm also the passenger, because this is so big. Working in public space makes it impossible to project and know everything which is happening. Morten Trovik also talked about this earlier, that you have an intention, but you also have a system meeting that, so you can never know. But you can see here, it's quite big. This is a door. So each one of these letters, there were 3 floors high, and you could enter the door from the back to maintain them from inside. So this was up for 6 months and boosted the debate again. This is Der Spiegel, the biggest news magazine in Germany. They just made a feature about a nation in search of itself, a new identity, and they illustrated this with the new Reichstag and my piece. So suddenly this piece became the sign of the new Germany, and the newspapers say this is the logo of Germany in the 21st century, which is of course very touching. They take art very seriously in Germany. This would never happen in Norway, where I'm from. Norway would never, accept an artist to design a national identity. And in Germany, they allow me to define that the doubt that they actually don't fall into another regime, they don't fall into new totalitarian style, that they actually balance so much that they can't cope with it themselves. And I come and say, that's it. That's the whole point. I want to make a tribute to the German doubt. And they're like, are you sure? Are you joking? And when the piece came down, I had collected 380 newspaper headlines, not about my piece, but about German politics. And they were all with the word doubt in it. So the general doubt is really huge in Germany. So I decided to publish these headlines as a newspaper called Zweifel Allgemeine, which is classical way of naming a newspaper, with all these headlines. Anyway, finally, in 2008, Palace of Doubt was demolished because somebody wanted to remake the castle of Kaiser Wilhelm. It's a huge tendency in society today to look back and make things great again. And they finally decided to make this huge copy of a castle. But people are against it, and this is not by me. This just happens in the night. People are projecting my piece on that new castle as a protest. And this has been going on for months, and now it's almost finished. And the directors of the new castle call me and say, the castle is finished, but we realized we need your doubt. Can we have it back? Can we put it on the roof? Because this is going to be going nowhere. We have to prove that we are still that nation of doubt. We are still the nation looking forward, not backward. So now this debate has been starting again without my intervention. It just boosts itself. So now these kind of things pop up as illustrations for how they want it. And I think that's, again, a fantastic thing about Germany. They take art so seriously. This is a project called Liberté. I was invited to do a proposal for the new Museum of Constitution, because Norway wanted to celebrate 100 years of freedom from Sweden in 2005. The Constitutional Museum is here. It's kind of a French miniature architecture. And when I was doing research there, they were very proud to show me all the living rooms and so on. And they also showed me that in this beautiful little wooden castle, the toilets were actually drawers from back then. Because toilets were not, just like in Versailles, there were no toilets because that's totally, profane. Nobody needs toilet if you're royal, you're above that. So they also had drawers as toilets instead of toilets. And they were proud of it. And so I was trying to find out what should I do. And the assignment was make a national monument. It should reflect the Norwegian constitution. It should be containing of several objects. It should be activating the audience, and it should be maintenance-free. So it's quite hard, actually, to do that kind of thing. So I started to read the whole constitution, and I realized the Norwegian constitution is a blue copy of the French and the American one. So it's not that super Norwegian, actually. So I thought, why should we celebrate Norway and Norway's constitution? Basically, we should celebrate the French constitution because that's the actual constitution. So I went to France and tried to collect interesting stories and research, and I found this one because I already had this little history of the toilet in the drawer. And this is a public toilet in Paris, a classical public toilet in Paris. But actually, it has a fantastic story. Because Jacques Chirac, the president, former president, you also used to be mayor in Paris. And when he was a mayor, he said, public toilets, they're such a disgrace for France. We have high values. We have the Egalité, Liberté, Fraternité. We are like children of the French Revolution. We have values. We cannot have toilets stinking and no women want to go there and so on. So he wanted to have a toilet proving from the top level to the bottom that France is a stylish, civilized democracy. And he used the Liberté, Egalité and Fraternité as an argument, which the French are very proud of course. So this is a baby of the French Revolution, actually. Because before the revolution, the state didn't have a responsibility for the citizens. And after the revolution, the state is responsible for you. And the French, they also had Marcel Duchamp, who kind of created the whole discourse of conceptual art, which is also my tradition. And then you have, on the other hand, as a parameter, you have the Liberty statue, which also comes from France. Liberty statue was a gift from France to the United States when they were celebrating their 100 years of freedom from England. So I thought, I think we're going to make a Liberty statue here for Norway, but it's not going to look like that. It's going to be a toilet. And the Norwegians, they also have a relationship to the outhouse toilet. During the occupation of Germany, everybody had their secret radio in that toilet because the soldiers didn't want to go into that stinky little house. So every time you wanted to listen to BBC, you just went to the toilet, closed the door, and you sat there for half an hour. So the toilet was also part of the resistance in Norway. Anyway, long story, but I proposed 3 toilets in red, white, and blue, Liberté, Egalité, Fraternité, and it was supposed to be the real toilets from Paris, the first ones, just renovated. And surprisingly, I won the competition. I won the whole competition. The whole jury said, this is crazy, but it's actually very good. But this constitutional museum, they didn't want it. They thought, we can't have a national monument like a toilet. This is too anal. So then the really fuss started. International newspapers started to talk about this. This was discussed in Swiss, in Germany, in England, in Italy, even in United States of America. And the American journalists said, what's happening in this young nation of Norway, celebrating their own centennial and at the same time censoring their own Liberty statue? So this started really to take off as a debate, which is, in my opinion, the most important thing in a democracy. So in a way, it was already a piece. It was a democracy piece, and about freedom. Anyway, the National Museum said, bring it here, show it here. We can show it for the Jubileum. So we did. We went to Paris, and we took them away, and we painted them, and we restored them. And inside every toilet, when you go in there, there's an audio program. So first, you hear speeches by Roosevelt, by the former king of Norway, talking about freedom in exile in London. And even Charles de Gaulle addressing Norway as a peace nation and a nation of freedom. So you sit there in the toilet quite alone, and you listen to these official speeches, and when you're starting to get finished, you get all the national anthems from these countries, France, US, and Norway, having all the same colors and based their constitution on the same. But this was too much for the National Museum. They decided they didn't want it after all. So they wanted me to pick it up and take it away. After I produced it and spent a lot of millions on producing it. Because they said they wanted to buy it, and then they showed it and they wanted me to take it away. So like you see, I signed the empty space because I thought that was also quite interesting. It went down the drain, literally. And then this piece has some kind of abilities to survive whatever. Because then I was invited by René Bloch, the gallerist of Josef Beuys and Sigmar Polke and Gerhard Richter. And he said, would you mind showing this in the Venice Biennale? Because I think this is really interesting. Whole Venice Biennale is also based on that young nation building from the last century. Every nation has its own house, and it's like nation building, nation building, nation building. So I said yes. And we brought it down there and put it up in front of the Norwegian pavilion. Here it is. Quite beautiful. And as you can see, on the other side of the Norwegian pavilion is a Russian pavilion. And some of the Russian artists showing there, they come over to me and they said, oh, this is fantastic. Thank you very much. I said, what? This is a critique of Putin, right? I said, I'm not sure, but if you want. Anyway, Russia has the same tricolore as Germany and France and Netherlands. It's all based on the same concept of a national identity. So, after the Venice Biennale, it came away, and I brought it back to Norway, and it was uncertain what should happen. Where to put it next? What's the next step? So I suggested this could be in front of the Parliament, maybe. Because, it didn't work in front of the Constitutional Museum, but what about the Parliament? And I proposed it, and all politicians, they were freaking out. No way! You shouldn't have toilets in front of the Parliament. Yeah, but I said, it's about democracy. No. We should have famous politicians in bronze in front of the Parliament, not toilets. So again, there was a huge debate going on for 5 years. And finally, the city of Oslo said, we want to rebuild that whole piazza in front of the parliament, and we want your toilet to be there, just like you want. Are you interested? And I said, yes. So, finally, after many years, 10 years after I won the competition in Eidsvoll, it finally was realized in front of the Norwegian Parliament, which is based on that constitution. Egalité, Fraternité, Liberté. And here it is, the jubileum of 200 years of constitution. It's quite postmodern. 10 years later, we celebrate 200 years. It's quite beautiful. And it's also interesting to see how people start to reflect that our values, our flag, our colors, our identity is not so unique. In these times of nationalism and so on, basically, we think it's very Russian to be Russian, or it's very Norwegian to be Norwegian, but it's actually very French to be Norwegian, and it's very American to be Russian, and vice versa. It's all part of the same thing. And I think that's super interesting to, as an artist, to kind of insist on being part of a debate, or facilitate a debate, or produce a debate, which is basically already there, but it's just too trivial for people to think about it. Here's another project from Oslo. These 4 big chimneys you see here, they are chimneys for a tunnel going under this new opera house. And this is a whole brand new city part of Oslo. And they needed to make these chimneys to get air in the tunnel. And I was invited to do a proposal for the chimneys, and I said, no, I don't want to decorate chimneys. That's not my thing. And they were like begging and begging, and there was a competition. I was like, okay, whatever. And I started to do research on these huge 47-meter high chimneys. What to do on a chimney pumping out CO2? How can I make that interesting? And I worked for months, and I did a lot of research, and I found out that actually the place where the chimneys are is where the plague, the Black Pest, came to Norway first time in 1348. And it hasn't been a city part since then. And now this new city part is appearing, and everybody talk about it as a new city part, but it's actually the oldest one. It's where the Oslo got its name. Ås, Lo, it means river and hill, which is there. So I started to do research on the plague, which you think you know about it, but you don't. How was it actually? What was the impact? How did it influence the, medical things, and how many died and so on? And I found out, together with some experts, that in Norway, 80% of people died from the plague, and only 20% survived. But the most interesting part is that the 20% that survived, they didn't survive because they were not contaminated, because they were. But 20% of the Norwegian population didn't die because they mutilated. Their genes just changed, so they couldn't get infected by the plague. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. That means the people living in Norway today, they're all survivors of that plague. And is this in my genes now? And I started to work with gene researchers and biologists, and I ended up with some researchers in Berkeley, in California, and they said, we're actually studying that Norwegian plague, because it's very interesting, because it also proves that 20% of Scandinavian people are immune to HIV and a lot of other epidemics. So we actually study that plague now. And if you want, we can show you all our material and the maps and everything. So they gave me these beautiful genetical maps, which they call barcode identification of a gene. And it's really like design, it looks beautiful. So I thought, that's it. Let's just put that black plague on that tower, spewing out carbon dioxide from the tunnel, which is in a way the plague of today. The carbon dioxide is killing us softly. So this is a projection of 72,000 LED fragments, turning these towers into some kind of Holocaust memorial. But in comparison to Holocaust, it wasn't man-made, it was made by nature, but we almost got distinguished from this plague. And today, it's unfortunately still like this, because of course, the city wanted it, but the people who made the chimneys, the street department, the Ministry of Street, they say, nah, I don't think so. And it became a debate again. And it's still a debate, which is good. In Norway, it's all about the money. We don't have censorship, they say. Censorship is for the third world or dictatorships and so on, but the Norwegian censorship is called money. The best way of dissing a project is to say, well, your project is just too expensive. It's perfect, because you can't even say, I'm censored, bring in the journalists, I'm censored. The money issue is like a trump card. If you say there is no money for that, you can't even say you're censored, but you are. So I did this project outside the museum of Edvard Munch, the famous Norwegian painter, who was supposed to have his new museum next to that opera and the chimney. So I borrowed 22 safe boxes from 22 banks in Norway. Existing safe boxes used for money. And I borrowed them. They took out the money, of course. And I placed them right out there as some kind of Donald Judd sculpture. And it's called Distinction, La Distinction. As you may know, from the sociology reference with cultural capital and symbolic capital and financial capital. And in Norway, financial capital is basically the main thing. And in Germany, for example, the cultural capital is the real capital. So this was kind of my protest to the chimneys. This is back to Berlin again. In Berlin, the Berlin Wall disappeared, luckily, but parts of it were still there because they wanted to keep it as a reminder, as a kind of historical piece. So 4 kilometers of it was protected actually by UNESCO even. So it was supposed to be there forever for everybody to see, until recently, because some people with money, they wanted to build luxury flats there, and they had to take away parts of it to make this possible. So, unfortunately, some politicians said yes to that, which is kind of like killing the whole concept of keeping the Mauer, the Berlin Wall. And I thought, and there was a lot of demonstrations and actions and police and everything. People were mad about it. And I was thinking, how can I relate to that? How can I engage myself to that without being just another, throwing Molotov cocktails at the police? And I thought, I have to be part of that problem. I have to buy myself into the problem. Maybe I could buy these pieces they took away now, so I become the problem, or at least I own a stock of the problem, because then I can actually address the problem with a different kind of authority. I have to own the problem, not just like throw stones at it. And I think this building was, you know, ugly and rude, and I was also looking at this telephone number, and it said, sale. Sale, that means it's cheap. This is like luxury. But, you know, that's a Freudian slip of German interpretation of English. It should say for sale, but sale means cheap. And it's the only thing cheap about that is the attitude. And then I suggested to do a kind of reversed piece in Trondheim, a Norwegian city up north. And this is an appendix of a larger museum. They wanted a piece of mine in front of their museum. So I thought, you know, maybe we can connect these things and talk about gentrification and the problems when the cities grow too fast. I guess Moscow is not an exception in that part. And this old museum used to be actually a place for poor people where they can get some soup because they didn't have food. And then it became a museum, and now the whole area has become a shopping district. So I developed a project called Kapitalistischer Realismus, which means capitalist realism. And this title is also ready-made because most of you know social realism, also from the socialist time. And in Germany, the most famous artists, Sigmar Polke and Gerhard Richter, they developed something they called capitalist realism, which was an irony to both capitalism and socialism, because they actually both came from the East. So I dedicated this project, Capitalist Realism, and did some research on that. And finally, I managed to actually buy pieces of the Berlin Wall, which had been there. So now I was the problem, and how to deal with that. I brought them to Trondheim, and as you see here on this building, which kind of looks like old communist-style architecture, don't you think? It has 6 panels of glass, and the rest is just concrete. So I thought, you know, 6 panels of glass, that would fit very good with 6 panels of concrete in front of that, so you actually block it. And I took the word sale because I thought it was like, you know, interesting. It's like the opposite. It's the opposite of the wall. The wall is a heavy, loaded, political, historical, almost untouchable object. And sale, as a word, it's such a slut. It's something very cheap. It's very temporary. When you see sale, it's like, oh, I have to take a look in there. There's sale there now. There's something which is very, very light-headed. And I think it's also, in a way, a logo of our time. Sale. Nowadays, it's sale 24/7. So I basically blocked the museum with the wall so they can kind of be protected from that sale, be protected from that shopping area, and still be reminded about this old school kind of criticism of society, which German artists have been doing so beautifully. And then in the museum, in the back here, you see it also says Kapitalistischer Realismus. I curated a show with 75 pieces of Gerhard Richter and Sigmar Polke from that time to kind of create a catalog to my own piece. Instead of just printing a catalog, I just brought and borrowed these original works. So you could get my work in the context of the big masters, which was really super cool that we managed to do that. So this is a permanent piece. I will end this talk with a piece which I'm working with now, which I'm also presenting in the booth of Terminal B. It's a piece which has been ongoing since 2009, together with Luba and Pikene på Broen. We back then went over to Murmansk just to do research and see, is there anything in public space in Murmansk we could, play with or criticize or turn around or something, which I usually do. And after some trips, I really fell in love with this garage culture. It's some kind of beautiful, almost anarchist way of creating a personal space in public space, but still it's very private space. And Murmansk still had this huge Soviet-style living blocks and no private housing. And then in between there's these hundreds and thousands of small, beautiful houses, almost like in Monopoly, these green houses, like, this is my house, this is your house. Private houses, but not private in terms of private corporations. They're just very private. And first you think it's for their car. But we talked with Luba and she said, yeah, it's not really for the cars. It's just for the guys who own the cars. So I thought, that's very interesting. So we started to do research on that. And we tried to get to know these guys and to look into them because it's very secret. And in a way it's beautiful, kind of, fascinating, almost organic thing in public space. Just having no windows, no address, no name. It's an enigma in a way. It's a mythical thing. And then slowly, we managed to get to know some guys who knew some other guys who had a garage. And we were supposed to get in there, and we realized, wow, some people, they were digging 2-3 stories under the ground. And they had some secret billiard cups, or they were producing snowboards, or they were fixing furniture, or they were just filling it with books and making it a private library or whatever. Everything else but cars. But this took so long time, and we went there again next year and next year, and it's been such a slow process. It's like slow food, but in the arts. But the good thing about this is you build trust. You become for them, not the foreigner who just wants to use them. And last time we were there, we went to the municipality to say, okay, we are now publicly announcing we want to do a project with this garage culture. And the culture boss said on his desk, garage culture. Never heard about it. What's that? That's just men drinking and doing bad things. That's not culture. Culture. I'll invite you to Bolshoi. They are here in Murmansk tonight. That's culture. This is not culture. So we were like, okay. And then finally this meeting was over. We go out to the room and this culture boss says, well, I also have a garage. And you can come over on Saturday if you want. So, okay, that's great. So we came to visit him on the Saturday evening, and he'd been putting up like a lot of herrings and wine and vodka and everything. Then he was like, is this the same person? And he started to hold a speech, and Luba had to translate. And he was like, we're so proud that you like our garages, and our wives, they say it's just bad. So, but they wanted to know why. Why are you interested in this? And I said, it's strange because in Norway or even in Germany, freedom is something out there, out in the free. But here, you lock yourself up in a cell. It's like a prison cell. But once you're inside, you're free. You do whatever you want. And it reminds me of something. It reminds me when I go to my studio and I lock the door and I put on the music and take off my clothes or, I don't know, read mail, whatever. It's the place where I'm free. And I say, in a way, you are artists. These are actually artist studios. It's not a functional place for your car. It's not a place you bring your wife. It's not a place you work. It's not a place you sleep. It's just a place, it's just a space for your freedom. And that's the same as an artist studio. And one of the guys, he's like, oh, that's the most beautiful thing ever said. So he was like hugging us, and he was like, now I think you also have to have your garage here in Murmansk. So you're part of this. So, you know, this is just so beautiful. And so we want to do more and more, and we want to include them, but we also want to move it. So we have now tried to play with, you know, the forms, the shapes, but also the possibility of making their private freedom, their secrets, into a very public secret. And still keep it as a secret, but show it. So our proposal is now to let each of these men paint one letter on their own roof and together create huge texts, poetical, philosophical, political texts about being free, which you can only see from space, actually, from Google Earth. And these are just projections we did, but this is almost how it's going to look if we succeed. So it's exciting to meet people, it's exciting to be an artist, and it's exciting to allow yourself to go out of the box, but also sometimes deep into the box. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it.